Deliver us, merciful God. Protect your servants from the Huns. Grant us safety.
What if I told you that a single battle saved Western civilization from total destruction in the 5th century? In 451, the world stood on the brink of disaster, and the shadow of Attila, the Scourge of God, loomed over Europe, whose hordes of Huns brought with them not just conquest, but a veritable apocalypse. It was a battle not for territory or wealth, but for the very future of the continent, the last glorious battle of the Old World against the nomadic storm. The confrontation was led by the great Roman commander, Flavius Aetius, who united his former enemies in a desperate attempt to save what remained of the empire. Watch the video to the end to find out how a Roman general, a barbarian, and a Visigoth king together stopped the greatest conqueror of the age in a bloody battle on the Catalaunian Fields. What if everything you've been taught is outdated? We're used to thinking of Rome as fallen, but the truth is much more complicated, especially when it comes to the Huns. In the middle of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former glory. But against the backdrop of internal strife and economic collapse, a threat was brewing that could wipe it out for good. This threat came from the steppes, and its name was Attila, a leader who united not only the Huns, but also many conquered Germanic and Slavic tribes under his command. His empire stretched from the Volga to the Rhine, and he ruled it with brutal efficiency, striking terror into all his neighbors. Each of his invasions into the empire was a disaster, leaving only ashes and ruins in his wake. Attila did not simply plunder, he destroyed infrastructure, crops, and manpower, making it almost impossible to rebuild the territory. The Romans, exhausted by wars with the Vandals and Goths, did not have the resources to repel such a massive onslaught. At the same time, diplomacy with Attila was humiliating, as it boiled down to paying a huge tribute in gold in exchange for a temporary peace. However, in 450, the situation changed. Attila laid claim to the Western Roman Empire under the pretext of marriage to Princess Honoria, sister of Emperor Valentinian III, who had sent him a ring with a request for help. Attila took this as a legitimate claim to half of the empire and a dowry, which of course was only a pretext for a long-planned invasion. Emperor Valentinian, shocked by this turn of events, categorically rejected the claims of the Hun leader, which made war inevitable. In March 451, Attila's huge army, numbering, according to some estimates, up to 100,000 soldiers, crossed the Rhine and began its invasion of the Roman province of Gaul, now the territory of modern France. The Huns swept away everything in their path: cities, fortresses, and rural settlements. Attila's strategy was simple: to suppress any resistance as quickly and brutally as possible in order to demoralize the enemy. We would be very interested to hear your opinion. Do you think that Flavius Aetius, being half barbarian, was the only one who could save Rome? Or was the empire already doomed? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories. Guess what happened next? The alliance between Rome and its worst enemies became the key to saving Europe. But its conclusion was an incredible diplomatic feat. Faced with the threat of the Huns, Aetius made the only correct but extremely risky decision. He turned to the Visigoths, who at that time were essentially an independent kingdom in Aquitaine and one of Rome's main enemies. The Visigoths were ruled by the old king Theodoric I, who, like his people, despised the Romans but hated the Huns even more. Convincing him to side with the declining empire was an incredibly difficult diplomatic task. For Theodoric, who remembered how Rome had used his people for its own purposes, the idea of defending the empire seemed absurd, and his advisors insisted on maintaining neutrality, which guaranteed the safety of their lands. But Aetius understood that Attila's invasion would not stop at the Loire River, and as soon as the Huns defeated the remnants of the Roman forces, they would immediately move on to the lands of the Visigoths. Participation in the battle was the only way to protect his own people. The Roman commander used this argument, appealing not to loyalty to Rome, but to the instinct of self-preservation and the common threat. He convinced Theodoric that Attila was not an ordinary conqueror, but a force seeking complete destruction, and that after the fall of Rome, it would be the turn of the barbarian kingdoms. It was a real geopolitical game in which Aetius risked everything to convince the king. After lengthy negotiations and an exchange of hostages, Theodoric the First agreed to form an alliance with Rome, but his decision was dictated not by love for the emperor, but by cold calculation. He understood that the common threat of Attila outweighed the long-standing enmity with the Romans, and that together they would be able to withstand it. This treaty was an unprecedented event, uniting the old Roman Empire with the new barbarian kingdoms that had arisen from its ruins. Aetius was able to add other forces to this main alliance, including the Franks, Alans, Burgundians, and Saxons, creating the most diverse and motley army Europe had ever seen. The warriors of these tribes, who had once fought each other, now stood shoulder to shoulder under the banner of Rome, which now had only symbolic meaning. This is how the united army of the West was born, the only hope for salvation. The retreat of the Huns was not a flight, but a maneuver. Attila, discovering that his enemy had united and outnumbered him, decided to retreat to the open plain, where his famous cavalry could operate with maximum effectiveness. He headed northeast to the vast Catalaunian Fields to give a decisive battle on his own terms. What would happen if the huge armies met in open combat, and how would Aetius be able to cope with the elusive Hun cavalry? I discovered this by accident, and it became the decisive factor in the victory. The key to victory was the battlefield chosen by Attila, but which became his trap. After the siege of Orleans was lifted, the armies of Aetius and Theodoric immediately began their pursuit, seeking to prevent Attila from gaining a foothold and plundering even more territory. The march to the Catalaunian Fields, located near the modern city of Troy, was a real test of strength for the motley coalition. This area, which was a vast plain, was ideal for the Hunnic cavalry, but Aetius knew how to turn this to his advantage. The Roman commander had to constantly balance the interests of his allies, who still distrusted each other. The Visigoths and Romans, Franks and Alans all had old scores to settle, and Aetius had to demonstrate incredible diplomatic skill to keep the army united. His authority, based on personal experience and the respect of the barbarians, was the only thing that kept this fragile coalition from falling apart. During the march, Aetius paid special attention to reconnaissance, using light Roman cavalry and Alan troops to keep a constant watch on the retreating Attila. He did not allow the Huns to break away, but he was in no hurry to engage in battle until he was completely sure of his troops' readiness. It was a slow, tense pursuit in which every step could be fatal. Attila, meanwhile, led his army across scorched earth, destroying all food and water supplies to slow down his pursuers. His goal was not simply to retreat, but to choose the perfect place and time for a decisive battle that would end in the complete destruction of the Roman Visigoth coalition. He was confident in the strength of his cavalry and that the legionaries on foot would be unable to withstand it in open terrain. Finally, the two huge armies met on the Catalaunian Fields. Before the battle, there was a minor skirmish for control of a strategically important hill that dominated the plain. This hill, despite its modest size, could be the key to victory, providing an advantageous position for observation and attack. In this first clash, the Huns attempted to capture the hill, but encountered fierce resistance from the Roman and Visigothic troops. The battle for the hill was bloody and swift. In the end, the Allies held the hill, which gave them an important moral advantage before the general battle. This showed Attila that he was facing an enemy who would not flinch in the face of his onslaught. Like this video if you think Aetius's ability to unite enemies for a common cause is a brilliant example of diplomacy in an era of war. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The largest battle of the 5th century began with incredible chaos that nearly led to disaster for the Allies. The Battle of the Catalaunian Fields, which took place at the end of June 451, began with a stunning attack by the Hunnic cavalry. Attila did not hesitate and threw his best forces into a frontal attack on the center of the Allies, seeking to break through their ranks. The plain shook under the trampling of thousands of hooves, and the sky filled with a cloud of arrows. As Aetius had predicted, the Alan center could not withstand such a blow and began to slowly retreat. and then completely faltered under the pressure of the Huns. This created a huge breach in the ranks of the allies, and Attila rushed into it, trying to divide the Roman Visigoth army. At that moment, the battle turned into utter chaos, with tribes, languages, and combat tactics all mixed together. The battle did not proceed in the usual Roman formation, but consisted of a series of fierce skirmishes, with each unit fighting for its survival. The Hunnic horsemen, showering their enemies with arrows, constantly maneuvered, avoiding direct contact with the heavy infantry, and then taking advantage of their numerical superiority, broke into the thinning ranks. On the right flank, the Visigoths, led by their old king Theodoric the Hun, fought with incredible courage and fury. They were determined to avenge their tribesmen and launched a powerful counterattack against Attila's Ostrogothic allies. This attack was so strong and unexpected that the left flank of the Hunnic coalition began to retreat rapidly. In the heat of battle, a tragedy occurred that could have demoralized the entire coalition. The Visigoth king Theodoric I, who despite his age was at the forefront, was knocked off his horse. He was killed, either trampled by his own retreating cavalry or struck by a spear. His death came as a shock to the Visigoths. The Huns were repelled but not destroyed. The battle was over, but the outcome was uncertain. Both sides suffered enormous losses. How would Aetius resolve this problem? Let Attila go to preserve the fragile alliance, or try to finish off his worst enemy? After sunset, an eerie silence fell over the Catalaunian Fields, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the cries of the medics gathering them up. The battle, which lasted most of the day, did not bring complete victory to either side, but it clearly marked the defeat of Attila, who for the first time in his life was forced to retreat and lock himself in his camp. He was surrounded but not broken, and his army, despite heavy losses, remained a formidable force. Attila's camp was a veritable fortress, surrounded by a ring of carts that the nomads used as makeshift walls. The Huns were prepared for a protracted defense and even to die in battle themselves, but not to surrender. Attila, in the spirit of barbarian pride, even ordered a huge bonfire to be built from saddles so that, in case of defeat, they could throw themselves into it and avoid the shame of captivity. Confusion reigned on the Allies' side. The Visigoths, who had lost their king, were eager for revenge and proposed to immediately storm the Hun camp to finish off Attila and avenge Theodoric's death. The Visigothic army was led by the young and ambitious Torismond, who was willing to risk everything for a quick and decisive victory. However, Flavius Aetius, who was an old fox in politics, understood that the complete defeat of the Huns could be even more dangerous for Rome than their presence. If Attila were destroyed, the Visigoths, feeling their strength and eliminating the external threat, could immediately turn their attention to Rome, which was weakened and defenseless. Aetius needed a balance of power, for the Huns to be sufficiently weakened, but not destroyed. He feared that Torismond, becoming the new king, could proclaim himself the independent ruler of all Gaul. Thus, by destroying Attila, Aetius would have created an even stronger and closer enemy that could threaten Italy itself. His strategic mind worked not only on the battlefield, but also in the corridors of power, anticipating far-reaching political consequences. What if I showed you a time machine? The defeat of the Huns in Gaul was only a delay, not the end of the apocalypse that befell Italy. Attila retreated, but his pride was hurt, and he swore revenge. As early as 452, he invaded the Apennine Peninsula, determined to strike at the very heart of the Western Roman Empire, Italy. This invasion, which was revenge for the Catalaunian Fields, was even more devastating than the campaign in Gaul. The first and most terrible victim was Aquileia, one of the largest and richest cities in northern Italy, which the Huns besieged and captured after a long and stubborn resistance. The city was not simply plundered, but wiped off the face of the earth, and its inhabitants were either killed or taken into slavery. The horror of this fall was so great that, according to legend, not a stone was left standing in its place, and its ruins were overgrown with grass. The Huns then continued their march south, and all of northern Italy lay defenseless before them. Cities such as Milan and Pavia were plundered, and the population fled to escape the hordes. Emperor Valentinian III in Ravenna was completely demoralized, and his army was unable to resist the invasion. Rome, which was itself weakened and lacked strong fortifications, awaited its fate. Thus, Aetius was unable to protect Italy from ruin, but he was able to save Rome from complete destruction. Attila left, but just a year later, in 453, he suddenly died in his sleep, bringing an end to his empire. Attila's death led to infighting among his sons and a rebellion by the conquered peoples. What was the real cause of Attila's sudden death? And how did his departure change the fate of Europe? The victory at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains and the subsequent salvation of Rome did not bring Aetius the honor and stability he deserved. On the contrary, his fame and influence became a mortal threat to him, as Emperor Valentinian III began to see his most capable commander not as a savior, but as a dangerous rival who could claim the throne. This fear of a strong leader was characteristic of the final years of the Western Roman Empire, where paranoia and intrigue flourished in the highest echelons of power. The emperor, a weak and envious man, could not accept that his salvation had come from a man who wielded far greater authority and influence than he did. A number of courtiers, fearing Aetius's growing power, also fueled the emperor's suspicions, convincing him that the commander was preparing for a coup d'etat. Too often, history had shown that a successful general became dangerous to his ruler, and Valentinian did not want to repeat the mistakes of his predecessors. The climax came in 454. During a private meeting at the imperial palace in Ravenna, Valentinian III, succumbing to his fears and the incitement of his courtiers, personally stabbed Aetius with his sword. According to a well-known anecdote, when the emperor boasted of his deed to one of the senators, the latter replied, "I do not know whether you did well or badly, but I know that with your left hand you have cut off your right." Aetius' death was a turning point after which the Western Roman Empire finally lost its ability to defend itself. Aetius was the last Roman capable of creating and leading a coalition that could withstand external threats. Without him, there was no one left who could manage the complex relations with the barbarian kingdoms that formed the basis of Roman defense. Emperor Valentinian III did not enjoy his triumph for long. Just a year later, in 455, he himself was killed by 2 bodyguards who were loyal to Aetius and avenged the death of their commander. This double blow, the loss of a great commander and the murder of the emperor, plunged the empire into final chaos and anarchy. After the emperor's assassination and the palace coups that followed, Rome was left without a strong leader and without an army. A few months after Valentinian III's death, in the same year, 455, Rome was captured and sacked by the Vandals, led by King Gaiseric. This plunder was perhaps less brutal than the invasion of the Huns, but it was the final and humiliating blow to the Eternal City. Thus, the victory at the Catalaunian Fields only delayed the inevitable. The Roman commander was able to save Gaul and delay the invasion of Italy for a year, but he was unable to save himself from the intrigues of his own court. With his death, the last hope for the restoration, or at least stabilization, of the Western Roman Empire was lost, and it finally fell just 22 years later, in 476. To truly understand the significance of the Catalaunian Fields, one must appreciate the military machine that Attila brought to Europe. The Hun army was not just a horde of savages, but a complex military mechanism, ideally suited for warfare in the steppes, and it was this adaptability that made them so formidable. Their tactics were the opposite of the heavy, unwieldy style of the Roman legions. The core of the Hun army was light cavalry, which was unmatched in speed and maneuverability by any European cavalry. The Huns were natural horsemen who spent their entire lives in the saddle, and their horses were hardy and undemanding. They could cover enormous distances in a short time, suddenly appearing where they were not expected. Their main weapon was a compound bow, a powerful and long-range weapon that allowed them to shoot at their enemies without engaging in close combat. The Huns used the Parthian shot tactic, turning around in the saddle at full gallop to shoot an arrow backwards, which was incredibly demoralizing for the pursuing infantry. Clouds of arrows turned the battlefield into a death zone. The Huns avoided protracted, head-on collisions, which were so beloved by the Romans. Instead, they used the tactic of feigned retreat, which was their trademark. The detachment would feign a panicked retreat, luring the heavy, slow-moving infantry into an ambush. then suddenly turn around, surround, and destroy their pursuers. However, the Hunnic army was not only cavalry, it included heavy horsemen and infantry from conquered tribes such as the Ostrogoths and Gepids. Attila used them as a battering ram or shield to weaken the enemy before throwing his elite Hun cavalry into battle. This made his army versatile. The Huns' logistics also differed from those of the Romans. They did not need supply trains or warehouses, as their army lived off plunder and quick foraging. Their entire life was adapted to mobility. They ate and slept in the saddle, and their portable dwellings were easy to dismantle and reassemble. This allowed them to move at incredible speeds that the Romans could not afford. Aetius' success at the Catalaunian Fields was not due to the size of his army, but to his tactical genius and ability to think strategically, using the strengths of his diverse allies. He was able to counter the mobility of the Huns with stability and coordination, which was the key to victory. Aetius' main tactical decision was to divide the Visigoths and Romans on the flanks rather than in the center. He knew that the Visigoths, being fierce and strong in close combat, were capable of a powerful counterattack and gave them a flank to maneuver. The Roman troops on the other flank, although outnumbered, maintained discipline and kept their formation. In the center, he deliberately placed the less reliable Allan troops, knowing that Attila would strike his main blow there. This position was, in essence, a sacrificial center that was supposed to take the full force of the Hun onslaught and allow the flanks to gain time to develop their attack. It was a risky maneuver, but one that ultimately paid off. Aetius took advantage of the terrain, fighting for a hill that gave him an advantage in observation and control of the field. Although he was unable to hold the entire plain, capturing this height allowed him to coordinate the actions of his army and monitor Attila's maneuvers. He understood that in the chaos of battle, any opportunity for control was important. An important component of the victory was the moral superiority the Allies gained by successfully lifting the siege of Orleans. This gave them the confidence that Attila could be defeated and created the momentum necessary for a decisive battle. Aetius skillfully used this feeling to unite his troops. Aetius' political skill lay in creating a coalition of enemies. He was able to convince Theodoric the Roman that Attila was a common threat and that only an alliance with Rome would save their lands. He did not try to command the barbarian kings, but interacted with them as equals, which would have been unthinkable for Rome 100 years earlier. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains did not lead to Attila's downfall, but it went down in history as one of the most important battles in European history. It was the first and only battle in which Attila was strategically defeated, and it put an end to his plans to conquer Western Europe. The main significance of the battle is that it stopped the Huns' advance westward. If Attila had captured Orleans and moved further into southern Gaul and then into Spain, the entire map of European barbarian kingdoms would have been redrawn. The Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians would have been destroyed or enslaved, and the Hunnic Empire would have engulfed the entire continent. In a sense, this battle saved the emerging European civilization. The Visigoths and Franks, who later became the basis for modern Spain, Portugal, and France, gained time and opportunity to strengthen their kingdoms. Without the Catalaunian Fields, these peoples might have been wiped off the face of the earth. The battle was the last triumph of the Roman Empire and its commander Aetius. It was the last time Rome was able to assemble such a powerful coalition, and the last major victory won by a Roman commander in the West. After Aetius's death, Rome never regained its military strength. The battle clearly demonstrated the new balance of power in Europe. The victory was won not by the Roman legions, but by an alliance of barbarian tribes. This showed that the future of the continent belonged to the new barbarian kingdoms, and that Rome was no longer the dominant military power. The battle became an example of the symbolic victory of Christianity over pagan barbarism. Attila, the Scourge of God, had been stopped. In the eyes of contemporaries, this was not just a military clash, but a struggle between the forces of civilization and the forces of chaos, which gave the battle an almost mystical significance. The Battle of the Catalaunian Fields is not just a page in a history textbook. It is a thrilling drama about the last hero of the old world. Flavius Aetius, uniting enemies under the threat of a common apocalypse, was able to stop the greatest conqueror of the era. His victory did not save Rome in the long run, but it gave Europe a chance for the future we know. It was a victory not of the sword, but of the mind, diplomacy, and strategic foresight. Which part of this story, Aetius's diplomatic genius or Attila's military machine, do you find most intriguing and why? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the great battles of the past.